Hello and welcome once again, everybody, to Suidlanders Week in Review. Although we're doing a week in the future today, Simon, how are you?
Yeah, I'm well, thanks. And yourself, Marius?
It's not a week in the future. It's more like a day in the future. Because what we're talking
Yeah.
about today is Trump and Putin to meet in Alaska tomorrow and everything that's concerning around that, what they might discuss, not discuss, what's the ramifications, and so forth and so forth. I'll begin to say I've listened to Pepe Escobar. And he said this is just going to be a spectacle, and he doesn't think that any real substance is going to come out of it. Simon, what's your opinion?
Uh, I'm not certain, but I am deeply skeptical. I I agree to some extent with Pepe Escobar, but I agree also with Brian Berletic. And in my defense, I came up with what Brian Berletic is saying very eloquently in a very scholarly way days before he came out with it. For whatever my opinion is worth, I think that this is highly dangerous. I think that, sorry, Morris, that I'm not always looking at the camera. I apologize, but I've got about 100 tabs open for things that I want to mention, and I'm just continuously flicking through them so that I don't lose track and
Yeah.
leave out half of the planning that I've done for this interview. Um, there are many things to say. You know, recently Donald Trump tried to impose tariffs on China. So China restricted the sale of rare earths to the USA. And when the USA backed down, China didn't. So I heard for the first time yesterday morning, I believe, that there are beginning to be supply chain problems where products require rare earth metals. So there's been a sort of a concertina effect,
Mm.
where the concertina opens and you don't see much effect immediately, and you think, oh, maybe it's not going to be so bad, and then it kind of closes, and it's even worse than you thought it would be. A concertina effect in the supply chain, and the USA gets 27% of its enriched uranium from Russia. The USA can't enrich, mine and enrich and what have you, enough of its own. It needs that 27%. It's not that it's does business with Russia as a favor or because the price is cheaper or something like that. And there are many nuclear power stations across the length and the breadth of the USA. And at least two that I know of that were shut down years and in fact decades ago are being renovated to start up again because of the anticipated demand for electricity by artificial intelligence. So the USA, oh, and let me, before I continue, give another example. Russia produces overwhelmingly the majority of the world's two or three, strictly speaking, three types of fertilizer. It's phosphorus, potassium, and sodium based. I forget. It's not my field at all. I didn't pay any attention in science class at school. I was a fool. But there are three types of bases of fertilizer. The one is about 70% of the market, 70% of world production and consumption. The other is about 25%, and the third one is 5 or 3% or something. And the USA is absolutely dependent upon Russia for that. So, on the one hand, you could say, well, the USA is not going to mess this up. On the other hand, if you look at Pete Hegseth's speech of the 11th of February of this year in Brussels to what's called the Ukraine Contact Group, which is really just a bunch of NATO guys who formed NATO countries who formed a special committee. he began the speech by talking about how we mustn't mess this up and we should recognize that NATO, Ukraine becoming a part of NATO is out of the question, etc., etc. But he then goes on to describe, if you read carefully, and anybody's welcome to look it up, Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, 11th of February 2025, speech in Brussels. He proceeds to outline a plot. He proceeds to talk about how freezing the conflict is an absolute necessity. Now, we've been through this before. The Russians have said, under no circumstances are we going to freeze the conflict for 30 days or 3 months to allow NATO to rearm Ukraine and to allow NATO to inject thousands of troops into Ukraine.
Yeah.
Just to restart it. We have a relatively much greater advantage on the battlefield at the moment. Why would we want that to be compressed or reduced? There's a New York Times article from last year, I believe. The title, it's a long title. I can only remember the beginning of it. It's called The Spy Wars. And then the rest of the title runs something like how the CIA took control of Ukraine's intelligence services to combat Russia, something like that. And it makes it absolutely plain that this is the USA's war. And this is Donald Trump's war, because although he wasn't in office yet, when he was in office over the years 2017, 18, 19, and 20, following the 2016 election, the US presidency having a 4-year cycle, of course, he gave more support in terms of arming Ukraine in anticipation of this war than either Barack Obama before him or Biden after him. Mm-hmm. So I'll give one more illustration, Marius, and then I'll be quiet and give you a chance. But the USA fought a war against Spain in the Philippines, the Spanish-American War, in 1899, 1900, 1901, something like that. Roughly the same time as the War of Freedom of the Boers, known as the Anglo-Boer War. And the pretext for that, they didn't have a good pretext, but the powers that be were determined to go to war. So they staged a attack on a ship called the Maine, as in the little US state in the northeast of the USA, Maine. And they made a slogan out of it, which went, "Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain. Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain. Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain." You know, people took this up as a chant. They were protesting in the streets. We've got to go and smash the Spanish. A few years later, at a time when there was a diktat in the USA that ran not to get involved in foreign entanglements. I forget who, but one of their founding fathers said that, and it became a slogan of the USA, that the USA should not get involved in foreign entanglements, European wars, wars with Spain, wars in the Philippines, etc., etc. But the USA wanted to take the Philippines from Spain when Spain was weak as a colony. And as I say, 15 years later, roughly in the heat of World War I, when Americans, ordinary citizens, voters, what have you, were adamantly determined that the government was not permitted to engage in World War I, to go and participate, the USA sailed the Lusitania. Lusitania means Portugal. It's an ancient word for Portugal. As we have the AM radio station in Johannesburg called, I don't know, Lusito something. And every year the Portuguese have a big festival called Lusito Land. And what they did was they broke all the rules pertaining to civilian vessels
Mm.
sailing around the world. In this case, from the USA to Great Britain, I think. Liverpool, I could be mistaken. So there were rules. You've got to sail with lights on. If it's a hospital ship, you've got to do X, Y, and Z, blah, blah, blah. And they loaded on it tons and tons and tons of ammunition and firearms and what have you in full view of the world just before it sailed. So it sailed as a civilian passenger liner, broke all the rules of war, civilian vessels, and they knew that American spies had witnessed it being loaded. So the Americans attacked it, sank it, and the Americans again said, "Oh, dear me, can you believe it? Now we're left with no choice, just like 15 years ago with Spain and the Maine." And so they were in the war. The same with Pearl Harbor. Once the Americans had constricted 88% of Japan's fuel.
Mm.
Japan doesn't have much in the way of natural resources. They knew, there's lots of correspondence about it, that Japan would be forced to retaliate and then they would be able to smash Japan. About the Korean War, I don't know. Although I can tell you that the arms that were shipped to the Korean War, for the Korean War, were shipped 10 years in advance. Anybody can look it up. A guy who was involved in the shipping, became a very famous man. He spoke about it, did many interviews about it. So it was premeditated and cynical. With Vietnam, the Gulf of Tonkin incident where Vietnamese ship supposedly tried to sink an American ship, a fiction. Weapons of mass destruction, a fiction. And so it goes on. This is a standard thing for the USA. The World Trade Center, it was brought down by a controlled demolition. That's just a fact. And we know who did it. The Israeli E-Team art students, people can look up E-Team and they can see them working in there. And the Mossad guys who recorded it and facilitated it and what have you. The E-Team art students obviously being part of Mossad too. So my point being, I beg your pardon, I'm going to quickly read something to you. It is a Russian Ministry of Defense warning that came out yesterday. According to information received through several channels, the Kiev regime is preparing a provocation aimed at disrupting the Russian-American negotiations scheduled for the 15th of August of this year. Now, that means the USA. The USA is the driving force behind this war. Again, the New York Times has spoken about this. This is the USA's war by proxy. For this purpose, a group of foreign media journalists was transported to the city of Chuguyev in the Kharkov region by SBU, that's the Ukrainian equivalent of, call it KGB or CIA, etc. Vehicles on Monday, the 11th of August, under the cover story of preparing a series of reports about city residents in the frontline zone. Immediately before the summit on Friday, the AFU has planned a provocation strike using unarmed aerial vehicles and missiles on one of the densely populated residential neighborhoods. Just to be clear, Kharkov is in Ukraine. Or a hospital with a large number of civilian casualties, which the imported Western journalists will be expected to immediately document. As a result of the Kiev regime's provocation, all responsibility for the strike and civilian casualties will be placed on the armed forces of the Russian Federation in order to create a negative media background and conditions for disrupting Russian-American cooperation on the issue of conflict resolution in Ukraine. Provocations are also possible in other populated areas under the control of the Kiev regime. And anybody who's been following this war well in recent years will know that statements from the Ministry of Defense of Russia are almost invariably correct. It's likely that this event will not take place because It's been exposed in advance.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to say, no, I'm not saying that it's going to happen. I am saying, if you don't trust me, if you think I'm a racist, sexist, biased, Russia fanboy, then put in the 2 or 3 hours over the next 2 or 3 weeks, beloved viewer, dear listener, to do your own research on the statements of the Russian Ministry of Defense over the past 3.5 years. They are very, very, very seldom wrong. And Marius, I'm going to end with this because it might be useful to you, and this will be very, very brief. I apologize to you. The Russian delegation, this is on Russians with Attitude, RWA. In my opinion, the best channel on the internet. For me, I don't say everybody should, it should appeal to everybody. A Russian delegation going to Alaska, Defense Minister Belousov, it's a very Foreign Minister Lavrov, Finance Minister Silvanov, President's Foreign Policy Aide Ushakov, President's Special Envoy Dmitriev, and of course, President Vladimir Putin. So this is a fantastically powerful delegation, unbelievable, unprecedented.
Mm.
And I think that they are placing themselves in a great deal of jeopardy, given the track record of the United States of America on initiating enormous conflicts through deceit and false flag events, etc., etc. And now I'm going to hand back to you, Marius. Thank you for your patience.
No problem, Simon. Yeah, thank you. One of the interesting things that I've also seen while I was doing a bit of my research is that a lot of people seem to think that the Arctic is going to come up in this discussion between Trump and Putin for the gas, the oil, and then obviously the route as well. Because if the, is it now, which canal is it? Not the Suez Canal? Is it the Suez Canal?
I think you're talking about the Panama Canal.
Oh, the Panama
Soaked up
Canal.
the
Yeah,
US
the
city.
Panama Canal. So if that gets closed, then that Arctic sea route that they're busy developing or creating or whatever is going to be essential. And Russia wants to control that as far, or is controlling that Arctic sea space. So that's also, they said, they think that that is why Trump chose Alaska for this meeting, or why both agreed in Alaska, because that is one of the major points that might come up to be discussed, is that whole Arctic scenario. Of course, I know USA definitely wants a finger in the pie there, but I don't know if Russia will submit to them having a slice of the pie there.
Well, at the end of last year, it might have been the beginning of this year, the USA unilaterally, in complete contravention of international law and all treaties, extended its undersea, they have these things like territorial waters and
Yeah.
an economic zone, maritime economic zone, these different terms for how much authority you may project off of your shore. You know, how much of the sea between South Africa's east coast and Australia belongs to South Africa? Well, there are special laws that say everything within, let's say, 20 miles of sea miles, nautical miles, 1.8 to 1 kilometers per mile, per mile, yes, is yours. Completely. It's not international waters. But up to, let's say, I don't know, 100 miles, people may not exploit the resources. It's kind of semi-international waters. People may transit, but they can't fish up all of the prawns and the shrimp and the herring and so on. So the USA just expanded into the Arctic last year, like that. So
Yeah.
you may be right. The Russians are extremely indignant about it, and that Arctic Silk Road, as some people refer to it, is going to be you are dead right, and I didn't think of it myself. It is beyond a strategic game changer. I think another reason why they might have chosen Alaska is that Vladimir Putin might have said, that's 13 time zones from my bed, from my flatlet in the Kremlin.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not going to go another time zone into, the USA has Eastern time. That's the time zone along the East Coast, Washington, New York, Florida, etc. Then it has Central. Then it has Mountain Time and Arizona time. Then it has Pacific time. Then it has Alaska time. So it's like, there's a big difference in the width of the USA. It might have been that Vladimir Putin said, look, I'm willing to fly whatever, 10 hours, 12 hours, 15 hours, but geez, guys, expecting me to fly all the way to Georgia is asking a bit much. It might have been a geographic compromise, a journey compromise, a length of trip compromise, but as you say, it might have much deeper and greater significance.
Yeah, yeah. And then yeah, I mean, I wonder if BRICS and the petrodollar and that kind of discussion might be had. Because I mean, if we look at BRICS, I think Russia is the main country in the BRICS countries
Hmm.
altogether, the big brother. Let's call them the big brother.
Hmm.
And obviously, everything works with the petrodollar and so forth. And the Americans don't want the dollar to be replaced by anything. Um,
Hmm.
I don't know. I mean, I've heard a couple of in the videos that I've watched now about this Alaska thing and what is everybody thinking are going to be discussed. And one of the guys was very adamant and certain that, listen here, while Trump has got the big brother of BRICS there, he might just as well start uh, asking some questions around that as well. What is their plans? Are they going to try and replace the dollar and so forth?
Marius, I don't think that they will talk about it, but I think you're onto something. Last week, the USA issued the largest number of bonds over 6 weeks. So 6 week bond. So how a bond works for anybody who doesn't know is it's the government sells debt, or anybody can do it. Eskom, our national electricity provider here in South Africa, which is a company. It's not it's state owned, but it's not part of the state. Has issued many bonds in the past. The government says buy this $100 bond. So you give the government $100, you get this bond, and it may be over 30 years. And every year the government gives you a few dollars on that $100 bond, and at the end of 30 years it gives you your $100 back. Um, the largest amount of 6 week
Sure.
bonds in US history, 6 week. That's a payday loan.
Yeah.
That points to cash flow problems.
Mm.
This week, on, I believe, I might have my days and dates mixed up, but I believe that on Monday it was announced that in this week, the, the USA is going to issue the largest number ever, the largest amount, largest dollar value ever, being $100 billion
Sure.
in 4 week
Turn around.
bonds.
Yeah, wow.
And and I think that you're right to look at the BRICS thing because that is a consequence. That cash flow problem is a consequence of dollar inflation.
Yeah.
When your the value of your currency decreases and you're paying off people, the US debt just passed $37 trillion, and you're paying off people, all the time, it adds up. To you and me, zero point 0.2 of a percent is nothing. 0.2 of a percent,
Mm.
I'm sucking that number out of thin air, of $37 trillion is enough for, you know,
Yeah.
the whole of Malawi never to have to work again. It's a fantastical sum of money. So at the moment there is a dollar crisis, and there have been suggestions that somebody has finally knocked it into Donald Trump's thick skull. Listen, buddy, this is a big, big, big problem. Every time you fight with China, and every time the dollar takes a knock because the Chinese and the Japanese and what have you don't want to buy bonds, and our own banks are reluctant. It's law in the USA that the banks have to buy a portion of the bonds. Um, we get into further trouble. This is what's cooking now.
Yeah.
So I think that you're right. I think that as an issue, it is in the background because Donald Trump is very much an economy, finance, a deal, commerce, commercially driven man. And so even if he doesn't know much about the war in Ukraine, as apparently he doesn't have a clue, he will know that the money's not looking too kosher at the moment. And I think that perhaps somebody said to me, yeah, but don't you understand? We've been warning you since forever that you can't do these things without consequences. Now we're issuing next week, this week, we're going to have to issue $100 billion of bonds on 4 weeks for a country, any country. That's a scandal.
Yeah.
That's what alcoholics on SASA grants in my local township do
Mm.
with the local corner shops. I've seen it. That's how the dregs of the dregs of the dregs of the world function. It's not supposed to be the USA. So, yeah, you could be onto something, Marius.
Yeah. Well, Simon, is there any last thoughts that you want to end off before we officially say goodbye? There's actually so much things that Trump could possibly speak to Putin about. Most people think it's just going to be about the war in Ukraine. I think there's going to be a lot of other types of discussions, like the things that we've talked about now, that might rather take place than the main issue of, listen here, Putin, can you stop beating Ukraine now? Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, Marius, it's a huge subject. I'm inclined to disagree with you, but if you're right, I'll be the first to put up my hand and say you were right, I was wrong. I'll say it on Tuesday night when we meet again. I don't think that Putin is going to entertain digressions in the conversation.
Yeah.
And you see the team that he's taken there. Yeah, the Minister of Finance, you might be right. But then the military guy, and the meeting, by the way, is only meant to take place tomorrow. They're flying today, meet tomorrow morning. The plane about an hour ago on flight tracker was halfway there. Um, so in one day, I don't know how many things can you squeeze into the conversation. I don't know, but
Hmm.
if you're right, then you're right. We'll
I,
see. I think that the USA is desperate to pivot to China, and it's desperate to pretend that it's not involved in this war and it's playing the peacemaker,
yeah.
the mediator, which you can't do if you're if I may use the word punk, who's supplying all the weapons, not to mention the generals in Wiesbaden, Germany, that are running the entire war.
Hmm.
And you see that big bunch of mercenaries was killed yesterday, British and American mercenaries. Um, yeah, you're up to it in your neck, and now you're pretending to be you soft and sweet and innocent and the nice guy who wants to stop this war. I am very skeptical, but let's see who
Yeah.
will
Let's see how it
take a
turns
friendly
out. I
bet
mean,
offline. Mm.
Simon, thank you once again for our Thursday chat, the weekend review, or the weekly events. How am I getting the shows?
Weekly events.
Weekly events. How am I getting the show's name wrong now? But yeah, let's see on Tuesday. Well, then we can discuss what has been discussed. A lot of people say they also think it's going to be like a fight if Putin and Trump in the beginning of the meeting are very sort of aggressive towards each other. They don't think all the other talks will fall by the wayside. But if it's very niceties and very friendly in the beginning, it might lead to some more other discussions. We'll have to wait and see. Is Trump going to put his foot in his mouth, or might might he be sensible for once in his life?
Mm. Marius, before I go, I'm looking at the clock, and unless I'm mistaken, we've got just about 4 or 5 minutes left. I quickly want to mention that next week, barring any unforeseen developments, we will begin a new series called the Midweek Interview, Suidlanders Midweek Interview. We might fiddle with the title along the way until we settle on the ideal, but every Wednesday for the foreseeable future, we'll be doing a foreign international interview. um, and yeah, I just mentioned it now. It's a new thing. It's very dramatic. We're very excited about it.
Yeah.
Next week's interview is going to be with a lady from Donetsk, from the Donbass, who lived through the war Up until recently, the Lions were pushed further backwards. It's calmed down recently, but was in much shelling. Her brother died, all sorts of dramatic stuff. So it should be absolutely fantastic for anybody who wants to hear it in the West, in English, from the horse's mouth, Marius.
Yeah, very excited about that as well. And like you said, we'll maybe we can do like a little what do you call it? A little trailer and
Mm,
people
mm.
get the people ready and excited for it. Simon, once again, thanks for your time, and then we'll speak on Tuesday again.
Fixed up. See you on Tuesday, Marius.
Cheers, man. Bye bye.
Cheerio. Bye bye.